People across the country are still asking the question how one woman went from being pulled over for a routine traffic violation to dead in a jail cell 3 days later. Sandra Bland, you've probably heard that name by now, the Chicago woman who was in Texas for a job interview and was found dead in her jail cell on July 13th. Well, the Waller County Police Department says she hung herself with a plastic garbage bag. Her family insists that's impossible. At a press conference yesterday, the captain of the sheriff's office said questions remain, but that it had been ruled a suicide.
Seeing that there has been a great scrutiny by outside sources into the cause of Miss Bland's death, I want to make clear that the death of Miss Bland was a tragic incident, not one of criminal intent.
Now the county's district attorney says her death is being examined as thoroughly as a murder investigation, as it is too early to determine the cause. Police say Bland was arrested for resisting arrest and assaulting an officer, but so far the only video of the incident shows Bland on the ground. Authorities are expected to release their dash cam of the arrest later today. But for now, new video spanning the time leading up to her death has been released, revealing that there was little to no movement in the hallway outside of her cell before her body was discovered at 9 in the morning. And police claim they made contact with her over an hour before via the intercom. Well, for more insight on this story and how it fits into a broader discussion about police procedure, I'm joined now by attorney Michael Hardy, general counsel to the National Action Network. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Hardy. Can you just begin by explaining your initial reaction to Miss Bland's death? As an attorney, did anything catch your attention in terms of procedural abnormalities?
Well, I think, like her family, many are really shocked by what happened because it was so sudden and so unexpected based on what everyone has said about her character, notwithstanding some of the other information about, her suffering from depression and other things. And so I think it's very key that this gets looked into. I mean, it really says something very significant about this notion of contempt of cop, if you will. The fact that she may or may not wanted to put out her cigarette was not any cause for that officer to engage her in the way that he did, which should not have led to an arrest at all. She should have never been in that jail cell.
Well, we also have to see why the police have waited so long to release the dash cam video. We should be getting that any moment. But considering all the evidence that exists currently in the case is sparse video footage and police testimony, why do you think the DA used the word murder when describing the investigation into her death?
Well, again, you're going to have to ask the district attorney that, but certainly if suicide, which is a form of homicide, it's a self-inflicted homicide, but if somehow he now has some evidence to suggest that it may be something other than a suicide, then of course it would be some level of a homicide, which could be anything from a murder to some form of intentional or unintentional manslaughter.
And what's so difficult about this case is that we can see the video footage that exists outside of her cell, but what can be done to really find out what happens in future cases like this? I mean, it seems like a violation of privacy to put cameras in actual cells, but how do you see as the solution here in terms of the difficult question here is that we don't know because there's no video evidence or any evidence that really exists other than, like I said, whatever the police are going to say.
Right. Well, there are several things. It's not really clear, and at least there's been no information that there have been any other detainees who may have been in the prison or in the detention center at that time. And of course, you don't know whether or not there may be other employees of the facility that saw something or heard something, and they may come forward in the course of the investigation. Of course, the videotape, as shown, does not seem to suggest that someone went into the cell during that period. But again, you don't know where all of the evidence comes from, and obviously the district attorney is the person that's on point and getting most of that information. I would add, though, that I don't know if it's something about that particular detention center, but as you know, there was an earlier hanging of an inmate as a result of an assault an alleged assault against an officer. So I think that investigation is also still pending, and so clearly the district attorney wants to be careful. And of course, if it was not self-inflicted, then it would have to be some other form of homicide.
Right, and then my question for you is, someone in Miss Bland's case who was really only pulled over for a traffic violation, can't emphasize that enough, and then arrested for what they say is resisting arrest, how typical as an attorney would it be for her to be detained in a cell alone?
Well, it may not be atypical for her in that county to be in a cell alone, depending on what the arrest traffic was like on that evening. What's more interesting, given what people know to be the facts of the situation, is why she was detained at all and not given a ticket or something to simply to appear in court at a later date.
Right.
We now know that a lot of this, again, occurred as a result of the police officer feeling as though his authority was being challenged, and there's nothing unconstitutional or illegal about someone doing the conduct that she engaged in.
And not only that, but she was detained for 3 days. I want to ask you one more question. We don't have very much time, but it's something that I'm really curious about. Why do you think Miss Bland's death has attracted so much mainstream media attention? I mean, other women of color have died at the hands of police, cases like Rekia Boyd and Miriam Carey, for example, and the mainstream media remains relatively silent.
Well, look, I think we're in a period now where this nation has been viewing a number of deaths, particularly of people of color, in the hands of policing that may not have been legitimate situations. In other words, wrongful deaths. And so I think the situation that she's engaged in, the fact that she was there to begin a new job, all of that leads a lot of interest, and people really want to get some straight answers. And of course, the family is demanding answers.
They do. They've asked for an independent autopsy, and we'll have to wait and see whether or not any of their calls for answers will be answered, really. Michael Hardy, General Counsel to the National Action Network, I appreciate you coming on.